Good morning, everyone. It's so good to see everybody. And thanks so much for everybody joining us online and also this morning today at our Fayetteville location. Everybody give it up for our Fayetteville location. Good to see you, Fayetteville. Hope you're having a good day. Hey, Tony and the team are just doing a great job over there, and you as a church are doing incredible things. So thank you so much for what you're doing on the Southside of Atlanta. If you weren't here last week, we started a brand new series called Decision Point. We all have decisions that hit us in life that we have to attack head on. Maybe sometimes we avoid those decisions for a little while, but eventually we have to come at those decisions. And we jumped in to the story of Ruth. And what we talked about was sometimes these decisions, when it came to specifically Ruth's story, it had to lead to something. It had to lead to something we call it a commitment, right? And so last week we talked about a commitment versus comfort, that sometimes we avoid these because we desire this. Because sometimes we're committing to something that's, it's just going to be a little more difficult. So I would rather commit to something that's a little bit more comfortable, right? But that's not what Ruth did. If we look at the story of Ruth, she tackled and she committed something head on that was going to be very, very difficult for her. And that's where we left off last week. And this week, what we're jumping into, a great way to put it is that we're jumping into a little bit of a mess, right? And we all have these in our lives. But the good thing is when it comes to a mess, there are things that clean up a mess, right? Does anybody have a robot at home that vacuums your house? Just right, you're like, yeah, right? Roomba, Shark, there's all these different ones. And the first time I ever saw one of these things years ago, it literally blew my mind because it's going around and it goes up to the dining room table and then it just turns and I'm like, you need to get that thing out of your house immediately because it knows everything that's going on, right? I found out that it maps your house and just all these amazing things. And now there's one, it goes to its home base and it empties itself into that home base. It blows my mind. So I saw this and I finally broke. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to have to go get one of these. And so obviously went to Amazon on Prime Day and, just made it happen. And it was so great. I remember I would come home. Sometimes I would come home and grab lunch, trying to save money since I just spent all of my money on a robot vacuum cleaner. So I came home to eat lunch and you look and you're like, vacuum lines on my floor, on my carpet, and I didn't even do anything. Shayla didn't do anything. The kids definitely didn't do anything. No one had to do anything, but this robot did. The robot made it happen. The first time we named the robot Peach, but Peach is gone now. We had to replace Peach, and let me just tell you why. I was at work one day, and I kept getting these notifications that there's something going on. It's like something is in the way. There's an error. Something is blocking Peach. There's been a little disturbance. Peach is not working right now. And I was like, this is weird. I don't know what happened. Maybe one of the dogs got in a fight with Peach and made Peach stop. And so I remember coming home for lunch that day, and I walk in my house. And it did involve a dog, actually. And my dog got sick, and Peach got all into sick. And she took the sick, and Peach took the sick everywhere, all in the dining room. And there's sick all over the place. There's just a lot of sick from my dog. And it was wonderful. It made me sick. And it was one of those things where, I go online and people are like, this happens all the time, just clean. I'm like, no, we are not cleaning that up. But there's just this mess everywhere, and I'm just so frustrated, and I text Shaylin. Shaylin's a teacher, so she answers text all day because she doesn't have anything to do, right? With kids running around, I'm like, I can't wait till she sees this, and so I'm trying to clean up. I call in sick. I can't go back to work, and so just trying to clean up this mess because messes happen. Now, some of you are thinking, Jason, not a big deal, right? Not a big deal. You just come back to it later. Or some of you clean up messes in a way that maybe the person you're married to looks at you and says, you're disgusting. You are not a good mess cleaner upper. I don't know if you ever remember this movie. Has anybody seen Big Daddy? Right? Do you remember this scene of Big Daddy? I don't know if you know what's about to happen here, if you've never seen Big Daddy. But this little kid, Adam Sandler, is kind of a step-in dad. This kid basically gets dropped off at his house, and Adam Sandler is this bachelor, and now you got to take care of a kid. So this kid's pouring cereal, and I don't know if you know about kids with gallons of milk. It can get very interesting. So we should all just be dairy-free. But, basically what happens, and this isn't a gallon of milk, the kid's pouring pouring it, and all of a sudden there's just says spilled milk. Some of you are freaking out right now. You can't handle it. But my favorite part of the entire movie is Adam Sandler goes, this is no problem. This is no problem. I'll clean this right up, and we'll make this all good. And we're good now. We're clean. That'll be fine. We'll come over here, and we're just clean. And Adam Sandler, like the kid's literally crying, and Adam Sandler's like, no, look, it's fine. You're in the best house in America. I just have newspapers all over the floor. Nowadays, let me tell you what, it was really tough to get these newspapers. They don't really have these anymore, so we're going to have to dry that out. But this is exactly how a lot of us clean messes, right? Because we find these messes. They happen in our life no matter what. No matter what we're dealing, messes happen in our lives. You see, things in life can get messy very, very, very quickly. If we're honest, it's not just things, but life is messy. They are, right? Maybe you leave your kids home for a couple hours and you go on a date if you have kids, and you come back, guess what? Mess. There's a mess there. It just happens. Or maybe, just maybe, you have some employees and you want to give them some leadership opportunity to grow, and so you give them a project that you definitely should have taken care of, and they have the responsibility of a toddler, and then you look at the project and you're like, mess. There's just messes everywhere. Life comes at you, and there are messes everywhere. When it comes to it, though, even though messes are going to happen, a lot of us, honestly, kind of like Adam Sandler did in this movie, I mean, you can kind of tackle it, but what do we really do in life? What do we really want to do? We want to do this right here. We want to avoid the mess. Right? We just want to avoid messes. We want to get away from these messes, and we want to not deal with it. Now, some of us are very clean people, and we like to attack messes, but some of us, we just rather run away. But what about when you can't? What about when you put it off and you put it off? Or what about when a mess happens and you have to take care of it right now? Like maybe you're coming home from work and you just want to relax, but all you're thinking about is that there was a massive storm last night, and there are branches and limbs and stuff everywhere, and if you don't clean it up after work, it's been a long day at work, you're going to get a letter from your HOA, because we all have gotten a letter from our HOAs. If you're in charge of the HOA, God bless you. You're wonderful. Thank you so much. But HOAs are great. Love them. But you have to come home from work, and you have to clean up all of that stuff. Or you have friends coming over. Right, you have friends coming over, if you have a small group coming, whatever it is, they're coming over, and you're just wanting to tidy up the house, and everything's great, and they're about to step in, and then your sweet daughter, who's so amazing, and when I say your sweet daughter, I'm speaking of mine specifically, all she wants to do at 8 years old is bake things. And so your sweet daughter wants to bake things for everyone coming over, and she knocks over an entire thing of flour all over the floor. I don't know if you know this or not, but Peach, my Roomba that is since deceased, doesn't clean up that much flour very well, so you have to clean that up. It interrupts your day. Messes interrupt your day. Or you get home and you're wanting to go outside and hang out with your family, or you have this to do, but then when you get home, you're actually cleaning out your car because the person at the coffee shop didn't put your lid on correctly, right? We've done that. You got to clean up a mess. Messes happen. And you know what? Eventually they just hit, and we got to take care of them. We got to take care of them. But what happens? What happens when a mess comes, a mess happens, and it needs a little bit more urgency from you? Maybe you can't do what we said, or like avoid the mess. Maybe we can't avoid the mess anymore because maybe the stakes are a little higher. It needs your attention ASAP. And when this happens, it's usually for a specific reason. It's because the mess has changed. It's still messy, but the mess has changed. You know how it's changed? You know why it's changed? Because now the mess involves someone, not just something. You see, when you put someone in the place of something that was just a thing, it's different. It's different. And you're probably thinking right now of your life. And maybe you're thinking of someone in your life that just has a messy life or is going through a mess. Or maybe you're thinking about yourself. Maybe you're a mess right now and you just feel like you're a mess. And now this requires us to actually step into the mess. But the problem is when we think about this, it gets scary because you know what a lot of us like to use? You know what a lot of us like to use? When we talked about the avoid the mess, I've titled it, right? We actually call this the avoidance technique, right? We have all these techniques of avoiding it. It's really just a bunch of, honestly, we're making excuses a lot of times. And so this avoidance technique happens because we're thinking in our head, we're like, okay, it involves someone now, but what if, oh man, what if I do tackle the mess? And now that it involves a person, what if I make the mess worse? Does anybody here ever feel like they just make things worse when they try to help? Yeah, you don't have to raise your hand. We know who you are, and the person sitting next to you knows who you are. But you're just like, I'm not helping at all because literally I'm going to make everything worse. Everything I'm just going to make worse, so I'm going to avoid the mess. Or what if it actually damages your relationship? Right? Have you ever seen someone who's just going through a mess and you try to help them with the mess and now they are just frustrated with you and now your relationship's a mess? Or what if it involves two people and you try to get in the middle of their mess and help and now it's just terrible. There's a broken relationship there. Their mess is all over you. There's just mess everywhere. And you're sitting there, Jason, if I would have just used this, everything would have been fine. My life is now a mess because I didn't avoid their mess. Just let them have their mess by themselves. They'll figure it out, or maybe someone who is good at dealing with messes will help them out. But the avoidance technique isn't just something that we use. Right? The best of us will move towards avoidance when it comes to messes in our life. The best of us think that maybe just putting a little bit of newspaper over spilled milk will be enough. Peter was faced with this, and he did this. Avoidance made sense for him. See in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, we see a mess approach Peter, and this is right after Jesus was arrested, and while Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she's sitting there by the fire, she looked closely at him. You also were with that Nazarene Jesus, she said. She's like, yeah, that guy that they just arrested, that all of that commotion was about, that guy they arrested, I think he's in big trouble. You're his friend. You hang out with him, right? Peter immediately, mess enters the picture in a bigger way that's a little bit more personal. It's coming close to him. What does Peter do? He does this right here. He denied it. I don't know or understand what you're talking about. And he went out into the entryway. The avoidance technique was a technique that one of the disciples of Jesus used when mess entered the picture. You see, even the best of us will avoid the most best of us. Because we think that, Jason, there are messy people. Absolutely, there are people in our lives that they're creating a mess in their own life over and over and over again, and you've tried to help you, and eventually you just have to walk away. And I understand that makes sense. But this is Jesus. This is the most best of us. And one of the best, one of the ones he chose, avoided it anyways. He avoided it anyways. Well, we look at this example of what it looks like for people, and you know what? We don't need to make excuses or define ourselves by poor examples. There's some people who aren't afraid of messy people. Some of you in here right now, some of you watching aren't afraid of messy people. You run towards that mess. And running to the mess, running towards the mess, going beyond newspaper can change your life, and it can even change a generation and generations to come. That's what attacking a mess can do. And that's what somebody in the story of Ruth did for her. Now, if you were with us last week, we introed what happened with Ruth. You see, she has a new mother-in-law because she's married to Naomi's, one of Naomi's sons, and Naomi's husband dies, and then both of Naomi's kids die. And so Naomi's like, I just got to leave. I got to go away. Things are rough. So Ruth and the other girl who married the other son, her name was Orpah, she was like, I'll just stay here. I'm going to go back to my homeland. I'm going to go back to Bethlehem and Judah because I just don't have anything here. And so Orpah stays. But then Ruth, she committed. She said, no, I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you at your worst. I'm going to come with you. And so now you have Ruth and Naomi on this journey back to Bethlehem, back to Judah, and even to bring a little context in this, you have two women traveling alone by themselves, and you know that can even sound dangerous now, but then it was a little bit more dangerous. It wasn't about just getting robbed. You can get kidnapped, you can get killed, all of these different things that they're walking into. It's a very dangerous situation, and so they're on their way to Naomi's land, where she's from. They're on the way there, and it was going to be comforting for her in such a time of need and sorrow. But even Ruth, she's like, well, hopefully I'm comforted. I'm with my mother-in-law, so I'm really not related to any of these people. None of these people even know me. We haven't FaceTimed or anything like that. We don't really know each other. So that's where they are on this journey. And they show up. And in Ruth, starting in chapter 2, this is where we pick up in the story. It says, now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And so here we're introduced to a guy named Boaz. I love these names back then, by the way. Boaz comes onto the scene, and what's so fascinating is how the author's like, hey, Boaz is kind of a big deal in this community. He's a man of standing, probably pretty wealthy, very respected in the community, a man of standing. That was a great phrase, a great way to be described if you were an individual. And so Boaz had a lot. He didn't really have anything to gain because he pretty much had everything he needed and even wanted, but he had a lot to lose. He had a lot to lose. And I want you to put a pin in that, hold on to that, because I want you to remember that about Boaz. And I want you to think about that when we're going through this story. So they arrive and they're there, and Ruth looks at Naomi. She goes, hey, long journey. We're going to need some food. We're going to need something. So I'm going to go into the field, and I'm going to go glean in the field. Now, if you don't know what gleaning is, basically what would happen during these times is the field would get harvested. And so the workers would be in the field, and they would be harvesting the field and getting all the wheat, whatever's going on in the field. And then you would have poor individuals, and they would come along behind the harvesters, and they would basically pick up the scraps. Like, oh, there's something there. Thank God they're not good at harvesting, and they're leaving a little bit, right? And they're just picking up the scraps along in the field. And during that time, when harvesters were going forward, they weren't allowed to turn around and pick up more, because during that time, culturally, it was like, hey, we need to make sure that the poor are getting food, and this is a way for them to getting food, to go into the field and glean. And that's exactly what Ruth is doing. She's trying to take care of her and Naomi in this new land, making sure they have food. They don't really have any standing or any money, and so that's exactly what she's doing. So Ruth goes out into the field, and she begins to pick up the scraps that are left behind. And Ruth's life is pretty messy. Her life is a life of eating scraps. She lost her husband, and she left her land. She's a Moabite woman, not in Moab, around people she doesn't know. So not only is she in a field, she is in a field with a bunch of people who don't recognize her and who've never seen her in that field before. So going on in the story, Ruth is in the field and she's gleaning, and we read, as it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz. So this man that we were just introduced to at the beginning of the chapter. And what's great is we know this because we just read it, that he's a man of high standing. He seems to be a great man. He has a lot of stuff. So Ruth doesn't know this. Ruth knows nothing about this man. Ruth knows nothing about Boaz, and he was from the clan of Elimelech. And just then, Ruth's in the field, she's gleaning, and the harvests are out there. Guess who shows up? Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. He said, "The Lord be with you." And they replied back to him, "The Lord bless you." And I'm just thinking, I'm seeing Boaz. Imagine if your boss just walked in and was just so happy, "The Lord be with you," or however your boss. And it seems like a good person to be. It seems like a very happy person, right? That's how we're going to start greeting each other around here, right? I'm going to say, hey, "The Lord be with you," but then you need to give me blessing, all right? He gets the blessing, the good stuff right here. And so this is Boaz, and he comes. But here's the thing again. Ruth still doesn't know him. Ruth is still in a foreign land. Ruth is not around anyone that knows her except for Naomi. Naomi doesn't have any say-so here. She's a widow. So this is all Ruth knows. And what if this guy, Boaz, shows up and sees her and doesn't recognize her? What if he had a bad night last night? What if the harvest isn't quite what it has been? What if he's not bringing in the resources that he normally does? What if he's just in a bad mood? You see, this is when the stakes can get a little bit messier for Ruth. But honestly, she's probably thinking to herself, my life can't get much worse than it is right now. It's about as bad as it is. Maybe I'll get lucky. Maybe something good will happen in my life, in my messy, messy life. In my life that is so messy, the best thing that has happened to me is that I'm picking up scraps so I can have food. That's where Ruth is right now. It's a tough place to be. It's a messy place to be. There's probably people in your life that are just hoping, wishing, praying that someone would just show up. Someone would just show up. That person showed up for Ruth. In verse 5, Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, who does that young woman belong to? And you know what this says about Boaz? This says that Boaz is regularly around his harvesters and regularly around his people, that he recognizes the typical people who are coming in his fields and gleaning in his fields and taking the scraps. And so he sees a woman, he's like, hey, who's that? And so this is when the tension starts building. Because now he notices her. Maybe she can just kind of hide in the back and maybe she can just blend in, and she doesn't blend in because she's not from that land. They can tell that she's not from there. Who does that young woman belong to? Who is that? So one of his workers replies to him. It's not just the worker, it's the overseer. He's kind of in charge of the workers. She is a Moabite woman who came back from Moab with Naomi. Ruth said, please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters. She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. What a little rude dig. He was like, you know what? She worked really hard. I mean, she did take a break though, right? I mean, why would he do that? I don't like this guy, right? And so he's kind of, hey, Boaz, this is what's going on. This is who she is. She showed up. She's not really from here. I hope it's okay she's here. And he's probably thinking, am I in trouble because I didn't take care of this situation? But what's amazing is that a man that had nothing to gain and everything to lose responds like this. Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter. Not, hey, stranger. Hey, you that I don't know. Because he could have said, hey, stranger, listen to me, and finish this, and it would have still been fine. But no, the first thing that he does is he sees someone in a mess, and he immediately brings this woman into his family. He didn't say, hey, worker, hey, harvester, hey, gleaner. He said, my daughter. I don't know about you. If you have a daughter, the weight that this carries, my daughter can do anything. And I'll just be like, yeah, sure, whatever you want. It's fine, right? This carries so much weight. His first response to a woman he didn't know, he never seen, who's not even from his land, a foreigner, says, my daughter, listen to me. I want you to listen. I'm in charge. Don't go and glean in another field. You no longer get scraps. You no longer get scraps. And don't go away from here. Don't leave. I'm not even telling you to leave. I'm not saying don't glean in the field, get out of here, go do something else. He says, stay here with the women who work for me. Stay here. You've been brought into the family. I can't imagine just the excitement and the joy of the mess that was just confronted in Ruth's life. That mess was not just covered up by some newspapers. This mess is now being cleaned up. And Ruth is seeing some hope because this man decided to be courageous This man was faced with a decision. There was a decision point in his life. And a woman who had a decision probably weeks ago chose commitment over comfort. And now Boaz is choosing courage because he didn't have to. He didn't have to do this. And he doesn't stop there. He keeps going. It says, watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And I'm guessing in this, not to speak negatively to you, not to look at you the wrong way, you are to not be touched. You're one of us now. You're brought into the family. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. Not the scrap water jars, the stuff that's fallen on the ground, and hopefully you can get a little bit of, You'll get the good water. The water that the men have filled in these, that's yours. When you get thirsty, take all the breaks you want. Do whatever you need. Welcome. Welcome to the family. See, this is Boaz. He was faced with a messy situation that so many of us are faced with in our lives. And this messy situation wasn't a thing anymore. It was a someone. And that someone was Ruth, who took a chance, followed her mother-in-law, her widow mother-in-law, to a land that she was not familiar with. And her life intersected with a man of courage. Because he could say this, and the people around him could have been like, why is he accepting her? She's not from here. She's taking away from people who are from here. She doesn't deserve this. Daughter, why did he call her my daughter? He's never called me that. All of the people who avoid messes and avoid messes and avoid messes are looking at a man who ran towards a mess. Said, bring your mess into my life, and I want to be here to help you clean that up. This was a decision that was met with courage. And it was courage that happened because Boaz, he asked himself a simple question. And it's one of my favorite questions, and you know it if you've been around here long enough. And Andy says this all the time. And it's the question that we need to ask ourselves all the time. It's, what does love require of me? What does love require of you? Boaz asked himself that question in this situation, and he responded. He knew exactly what love required of him. He knew exactly what it required of him. You know what's amazing is every single person thought he would respond in a different way, even Ruth. Because look how Ruth responds to him in verse 10. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground out of gratefulness and probably in the middle of her mess and not even knowing what to do. She asked him, why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner? Not that you accepted me, not that you let me stay here, that you even noticed me, that I found that kind of favor with you. She didn't even expect to be noticed. That she was so far down the rungs on the ladder, down the totem pole, any imagery you can think of. She was so far down, she didn't expect anybody to notice her. Scraps were going to be good enough for her for the rest of her life. How and why did you even notice me? Boaz, he asked himself the question, what does love require of me? See, what love requires of me is to notice the unnoticeable, is to notice the one who's picking up the scraps, someone and a woman who doesn't think she deserves anything. We look at the life of Boaz and the choice that he made and the courage that he showed. Man, and for us, it's probably hard to think about because we have to ask ourselves a question. Here's the question. Are you willing to run towards the mess? This probably isn't a new question for us. This probably isn't a question that we've never faced, but it's one that we have to start taking seriously. And the reason being that there are people in our lives, tons of people in our lives, family, friends, coworkers, strangers, who need a willing person to wade into the mess with them, just to dare to be courageous. Think of others first. See, a lot of times courage is based on us thinking more about ourselves. Because we live in a culture that is all about, how do I get this? And how do I get out? How do I climb that ladder? We live in a culture of selfishness. And the reason that we avoid things so much is simple. Selfishness is the foundation of avoidance. I don't have the time. I don't want to get messy. Not my problem. Me, 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 me. And Boaz said no. Because selflessness is the foundation of courage. You, others, 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 others. The foundation of courage. It takes courage to step out. Honestly, in our culture, where you work, maybe even in your family, selfishness is acceptable because you're taking care of you. I understand sometimes we need me time, right? Sometimes we just need to pull back. We need a little bit of me time. Jason, there are people in our life I've been trying to help. I understand all of that. And it is acceptable. But guess what? Boaz, he wasn't satisfied with acceptable. He wasn't satisfied with what people not only possibly expected him to do, but were fine with him doing. He would still be a man of standing in the community. There's nothing wrong with acceptable. But Boaz wasn't satisfied with acceptable. You know why? Because Boaz chose the admirable. I don't want to just be accepted. I want to be admired because of the decisions. I want to be admired because of the way that I love and I treat people. I'm willing to look at messes and lives and run towards that mess. So for us, we don't settle for acceptable. This is what the church should be. If we're a follower of Jesus, we don't need to settle for the acceptable. We need to choose the admirable. That's what followers of Jesus do, because you can go around and people can think very highly of you for just doing acceptable things. You can get a really long way in life and be liked by a lot of people by being acceptable, but are you admired by people because you're willing to do the courageous thing and to step into the mess of others? That is what others need from us. And guess what? It was already done for you. It was already done for you. Jesus had everything, never did anything wrong. And he looked at the mess of the world. He looked at the mess of me. He looked at the mess of you. He looked at the mess of everything. He said, okay, I'm willing to get that mess on me, even to the point of death. It's worth it. Because we needed it. You might not even be a follower of Jesus and maybe not taking that step of faith. He stepped in the mess for you. For all of you. He didn't just clean it up with some newspaper. He cleaned it up with his life. He cleaned it up with his life. Someone in your life needs you to look at their mess and doesn't need you to stand up here, honestly, like I'm doing, to stand up and to preach and direct and tell them how they've met. No. Someone in your life needs you to look at their mess and doesn't need you to lord over them and look down at their mess. Someone in your life needs you to come down and to just step down like this right here and to come at their level and to sit in their mess with them. Because somebody sat in the mess with you. Somebody sat in the mess with you. There's some of you who are in here today. You're literally in this church because your life is a mess, and that you heard, someone told you one time that Jesus followers are willing to do the admiral thing and to sit in the mess and jump in and be courageous with you. Some of you left the church because people in the church weren't willing to jump in the mess with you, and you just came back for one more try. And some of you, somebody has set in the mess in your life, and that's why you're here today, and that's why you follow Jesus, because you run towards the mess. It's not about me and what I can get from church and what church can do for me and what this can do. No. I am the church, and I want to be the church for others, just like Jesus is the church for me. That's what stepping in the mess is. Sitting down into the mess. And my question for you is, are you willing to step in the mess? As a church, that's what we do. We will never back off from that. We're not going to. The deepest thing that we can do as a follower of Jesus is not understand the Greek and the Hebrew of Scripture. The deepest thing that we can do as a follower of Jesus is to apply Jesus' life to our life and to say, what does love require of me? Have you applied that to your life? I need to look in the mirror and say, have I applied that to my life? Because if I haven't, I haven't even gone past the shallow end, and I'm talking about jumping off the diving board. It's not about depth, it's about application. Applying courage and a willingness to step in the mess. That is the sign of a follower of Jesus. And if you're here today and you're looking for a follower of Jesus to do that with you, you're in the right place. We want to do that with you because Jesus did that for all of us. Are we willing to do that for others? Let me pray for us. God, we love you. We thank you for your love for us. And God, I just pray that we would not be professional mess avoiders, God, but we would be willing to step into the mess of the world and step into the mess that intersect people's lives. God, who cares if they cause the mess? I pray that we will be willing to step into it anyways and show them the love of Jesus in a way that gives them hope. And God, maybe we're the ones in a mess and we need someone to show us that courage and to show us that selflessness. And I pray that we would find that. I pray that we would find that. God, we love you. We thank you for your son, Jesus, who was not a mess avoider, that he tackled it, and he tackled it with his life. And we're grateful for that. And we ask all of this in his name. Amen.